Welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. I'm Dr. Steve Thayer. Today, my co-host, Dr. Reid Robison, and I discuss what makes group therapy so special. We discuss the unique advantages of both psychedelic and non-psychedelic groups. We talk about some of the potential drawbacks of group work, and of course, much, much more. For those of you who are interested in becoming psychedelic therapists, Numinus offers several courses that will help you sharpen your skills and develop your expertise in this area. Click on the link in the show notes or go directly to numinus.com/hour-training-selection, and you can use the code PTF10 for 10% off the courses there. If you haven't signed up for the MAPS Psychedelic Science Conference yet in Denver, coming up in June, it's not too late. Numinus is offering an exclusive 20% discount code to our PTF podcast listeners. You can click on the link in our show notes and use the code NWI20 at checkout. We're so grateful for those of you who listen to the show. If you'd like to support the show, you can do that by leaving us a rating or review in places like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can share the episode, or if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you so much, and please enjoy our episode on group therapy. Here we are yet again. It's good to see you, Reid.
Same.
That was a huge sigh. As I did that intro, I took a huge breath and just sighed into this episode.
Has it been a long week?
It has been kind of a long week, I'll have to admit. I'm a bit tired. I'm a little congested. But I'm gonna try to bring it for the audience today.
All right, let's go.
Let's bring it. So today we thought it might be fun to talk about group therapy. So both psychedelic group versus individual therapy, but also just regular old groups. The power of healing through community.
Yeah, I have always been so puzzled why we don't do more groups in mental health.
Yeah.
Like, I know it's not from a place of excuse. I know, like, there needs to be radical responsibility in saying something like that because we have clinics and we oversee a lot of practitioners.
Groups, yeah.
So we're trying. Like, I just finished a ketamine group a couple days ago, a cohort, and it's beautiful work, but for so many reasons, if we did more group therapy in mental health, not just in the psychedelic world, we could save billions of healthcare dollars because of the increased accessibility, and there are some powerful advantages we'll talk about.
Yeah. That pricing advantage is a great one. Like accessibility, meaning, we only have so many clinicians, and these clinicians got to pay their bills. So healthcare costs a certain amount of money. But if you can maximize the time, the therapeutic hour, by having one or two clinicians facilitate a group of 5 to 12 people, then you get, and also the group costs less per client because that cost is spread across those clients. It's kind of a win-win for everybody.
Oh yeah, and we saw that in this ketamine group pilot that we did here out of this office we're sitting in, and in a nearby clinic, another Numinus clinic, and then also in Montreal, one of our clinics there. And the price for each individual was so much less. We were still able to leverage insurance for whatever we could. The price out of pocket was so much less than it would have been otherwise. And I swear, every one of the 6 participants in our group would say this, and did in the closing group, that there was just so much power in doing this in a group format. They were scared before. It blew them away how valuable that was to go through an experience with others and mirror things to each other, learn from each other's experiences and journeys, and feel supported.
Right. So yeah, you're delving into all the reasons why group can be so powerful. So let's do it. Let's talk about it, because it doesn't have to be psychedelic, although psychedelic groups, whether it's a ketamine group like we did, or you go to a retreat and do psilocybin truffles in the Netherlands, or you could do ayahuasca at a place like Soltara or Rhythmia, or wherever, right?
Yeah, we took a bunch of people to Jamaica earlier this year and had a big group for 2 psilocybin dosing sessions.
Right. So there's something really special about going through an ordeal like a psychedelic journey together.
Yeah.
That it creates this really, really incredible bond. where, there are times when you might need support and support is given. There are times when you are doing okay and you get to offer support to others. And then even if that dynamic doesn't happen during the journey, like even if you're just sort of on your mat, your cushion, your chair, having your own journey, other people are having their journeys around you. And then there's this sense of safety, and it's a sense of safety that has to be earned often, where because we've all gone through an ordeal, we can now share. And there are those integration circles afterwards, or integration sessions where people are talking about their particular journey. And it might be different from yours, but because it was a shared, like I keep saying, a shared ordeal, there's a special bond there. It's a bond that you often see in military veterans, people who have seen combat, and a lot of what makes them feel depressed when they return home is that they're missing that really, really close, intimate connection that's only really forged in the furnace of an ordeal, like combat or a psychedelic experience.
Yeah, and in the throes of a mental health condition, you often feel hopeless. And part of that is feeling alone. In fact, that's the way I see hopelessness is one big chunk is you don't feel like it'll ever get better. And another is like you feel like you're in it by yourself or no one knows how you feel. You get in a group and it takes at least a large portion of one of those things by feeling alone. Just you get to be there with others, sharing their struggles as well, and supporting one another.
Right. Yeah, I think it's one of the main differences between, just one-on-one therapy with a therapist and group is that you get to feel validated from your peers. It's one thing to be validated by your therapist, right, who listens to you well and expresses these validating statements. It's quite another thing to be validated by somebody who you're not paying to validate you, right? Yeah. For somebody who's also lonely with you, who's in the throes of their struggle, like, hey, I know what that feels like. Here's my story. It syncs up with your story. In my graduate training, my dissertation was a validity study of something called the group questionnaire, which was a self-report questionnaire designed by Gary Burlingame, my dissertation chair, who's now the president of the American Group Psychotherapy Association.
Go Gary.
He's a big deal in the group therapy literature. So we did this validity study on this questionnaire that measures the quality of the therapeutic relationship in group therapy specifically. And there are a couple of variables. I won't go into too much nerdy detail, but basically there's a relationship between the member and other members. There's a relationship between the group member and the group leader. Yeah. But there's also this gestalt, this relationship between the group member and the group as a whole. And depending on how good that bond is, the positive bonding relationship, the positive working relationship, the empathic bond, feeling understood, that dramatically affects the person's outcomes in group therapy. Cool. And speaking of outcomes, group therapy outcomes are on par with and sometimes surpass individual therapy outcomes. So it speaks again to accessibility and effectiveness.
Yeah, in one meta-analysis of groups versus individual that was speaking to that, I saw something interesting that said even if we offered 10% more of our mental health services as group compared to individual, it would mean that like 3.5 more million people could be seen this year for mental health care in the U.S., something like that. It's wild. Or if we did more of our care, most of our care in group, in a group model, we would need like 35,000 less therapists, which therapists are hard to come by sometimes.
Yeah. It makes me think if groups, and I think they will, that groups will be used to help solve the accessibility problem that we're going to see when things like MDMA and psilocybin get FDA approved.
Yeah, it's certainly talked about. We're doing it in these pilots to offer ketamine-assisted therapy that way, for example, and retreats kind of happen that way naturally.
Right. So you mentioned your ketamine group and how powerful it was being in the group context. Tell us some more things about why you think it was uniquely powerful as doing it as a group rather than individual.
Yeah, and we talked about Well, first of all, just being nervous about something is a sign that you're probably onto something exciting, meaningful. Like I remember some people before just being like, oh, I can't imagine sharing in my personal stuff with a group of strangers. But to see that cohesion build and the comfort and the group take a life of its own was really amazing. And so we talked about the installation of hope, like the shared experiences that people go through. There's also just learning the varieties of life experience from each other, getting touched by people's vulnerability and bravery, and taking some of that on, modeling like inspiring things that you see and witness in others. The social skills, the chance to practice like compassion, empathy out loud, the corrective experience where we all come from having dysfunctional moments in certain groups in family or work or school, and the corrective experience there is huge. So those are some that come to mind.
Yeah, it makes me think of what we used to, in graduate school, we used to call groups a social microcosm.
Yeah.
Where it's this little laboratory where you can have, like you described, those corrective experiences, and you can take risks. Because the group is arbitrarily constructed. Well, it's not arbitrarily constructed. We actually take great care in composing a group filled with people that we think are gonna have good dynamics. There's a little bit of an art and a science to that, to putting groups together, where you don't want to have somebody who's dominating the group. You don't want to have somebody who is so nervous they can't access the power of the group. Those kinds of things. But it's a unique power. I totally just lost my train of thought.
Well, I love the art of it too, of picking a group. You and I did that together over and over for our frontline healthcare worker ketamine groups last year and year before. And having just went through that with Hannah to put together this ketamine group, it's really like there's some basic principles to follow, of course, but there's also that, like you mentioned, gestalt, or that, having worked with thousands of people in individual and group settings, you start to get a feel for the components that might make up this organism that is a group. But I'd say my main prerequisites for bringing someone into a group are just like the basic beginnings of the ability to get vulnerable, especially in terms of sharing one's inner world. And two would be to be able to feel and express compassion for others.
Right.
And these are skills that we all need to develop, and just like the capacity for those.
Yeah, you want to have at least the seeds planted so that they can work on those in the group if they need to. Because if you don't do that, and you have somebody in there who is a malignant narcissist or somebody who's cruel, then what was powerful about a group becomes very, very dangerous about a group. Dangerous in the sense that if somebody, is in this group situation and they've mustered up the courage to be vulnerable, and it's met with rejection, it's met with criticism or judgment, then that's an opportunity for re-traumatization instead of a corrective experience, like you talked about.
Yeah.
So groups are not without risk, but nothing really is without risk.
Yeah. I mean, what's a risk is also, with a good facilitator and these basic principles, a chance for like a powerful healing and corrective and transformative experience. Like if someone does like have a moment of, just getting dysregulated or whatever, to be able to help not just the individual, but the whole group through that to the other side of that can be powerful.
Right. It makes me think of group psychedelic experiences, whether it's in a retreat or in a ketamine group like we've done. Sometimes people are concerned that another person's process will interrupt or interfere or disrupt their process. And these are understandable concerns. And I remember in hearing a meditation teacher talk about this in the context of group meditation, where it's a silent meditation, they're breathing, and somebody's got the sniffles, or somebody's bomber jacket is rustling. And so this person experiences annoyance at these sounds, but that phenomenon, right, the emergence of annoyance is the work. In the context of this like the trigger, like we often say, is now showing you where the work is. So the same thing could be said in these psychedelic group sessions. I know we had a session once where there was one person who was talking pretty much the whole time. This person was processing verbally, and there were other people in the room who were not. And it did sort of shape the energy of the room, and then people started responding and talking. But I know that in some ceremonial, like for instance, ayahuasca circles, if somebody is very loud and disruptive, they'll actually take them out. I may or may not have had this experience.
Through the quiet room.
Thrown into the quiet room because I was too loud or disruptive.
Yeah. Not in a punitive way, in a helpful way to have someone be able to express without, persistently, excessively derailing everyone else's experience. Because those noises in a group, like someone's tears, someone's vomiting, whatever it may be, are extremely powerful as part of the experience. But if it's someone wailing for hours and it's really triggering or
dominating,
that's part of the art of facilitating, of knowing when to intervene versus letting people have their experience.
Right. Yeah. Kind of what the group needs.
Yeah.
Another way that groups sometimes can be challenging is, and I hear this from like the 12-step group community, is if somebody shows up and they feel like an outsider within the group itself. You mentioned the word cohesion. When a group is functioning well, it's a cohesive group. There's a shared bond. There's a shared understanding. Even if there are, of course, going to be differences, they overlap enough that they can create a sense of community. I had a client once who went to a 12-step group, and he was young. His relationship to alcohol was a bit different than the people he showed up to an AA group, and by his description, it was a bunch of old alcoholics who couldn't really understand where he was coming from, and he just felt out of place. And it wasn't helpful. But fortunately for him, and I'm proud of him for this, he didn't give up, and he eventually found a group that clicked, that he felt good in.
And it does take time. There's a process. There's an unfolding of the trust and cohesion in a group. In fact, I was just, in thinking about this topic, flipping through a couple things. Irving Yalom's textbook on group therapy. But another one was, who was it? Bruce Tuckman in the 60s wrote about the stages of a group. And I hadn't looked at this in a while, so I thought it was fun.
Storming, norming, forming?
Yeah, so stage one is a forming. Like you're the leader's most active and you're laying the ground rules, confidentiality, attendance, all that, and discuss kind of the time frame and termination. But then stage two is storming, like there's anxiety, ambiguity, even some conflict, starting to define themselves or create an identity of the group. But this also makes a climate where people can be free to disagree if they need to and be honest. But then comes the cohesiveness. So it's interesting. The norming phase, stage 3, is where the alliance builds, and then stage 4, working. Working, the performing phase, like a lot of transforming. And then adjourning. Stage 5 is like termination, saying goodbyes or what's next, and shedding a tear or two.
I like that. And you can go through epicycles within a group. Where it doesn't have to be a complete linear curve. Well, that's not the right word, but like, stepwise through those, and then it's over. Some groups are designed that way. But there's lots of different ways to design a group. I've got a friend who's been a part of a men's group, the same group with the same guys for decades.
Yeah.
And he's been with these guys for a long time. That's more of a support group. And you might go through those same stages when you're first forming the support group, but the support group sort of just hangs out in that performing stage.
Yeah.
And then as new members come in, they might go through those same epicycles again.
Unlike a psychoeducational group offered by a treatment center about a topic to introduce potential clients to something, or teach about how to manage added stress around the holidays, like around a topic. Or there might be skills groups for whether it's teens or autism spectrum disorders, or like DBT. I used to lead DBT skills groups for like in an eating disorder treatment center, for example, or For quite some time, I did spirituality group. That was my favorite one to do. But there was even at this Center for Change, something called ceremonial group that was the coolest thing, like just doing really vulnerable processes as a group, ordeals essentially, to go through something, whether you're facing your fears and singing in front of a group or something else, like you get some big victories from overcoming those fears.
Yeah, so there are groups with curriculum, and the curriculum ends. There are groups that are just a one-time thing. And then there are groups that I remember Gary talking to me about these old school encounter groups where it was all about here and now interpersonal processing.
Yeah, I like that.
And when I went to AGPA conference back in 2008, one of the things you could do was participate in an encounter group with other attendees, facilitated by some old bigwig in the group therapy space. And as a young graduate student, that was really profound for me, to just be in a group of other budding professionals, some of them very experienced professionals, I guess, and be invited to be super vulnerable. And it was essentially group therapy. And of course they had to make all the caveats, like, we're not your therapist. This isn't actually therapy. This is educational. But we were processing some stuff in those groups. But encounter groups are interesting because they encourage like really present here and now stuff. So it's like, I'm really feeling uncomfortable right now. And when Reid said that, it triggered this in me. And then Reid's invited to say, "Oh, it makes me sad that triggered that in you, and it makes me think about what it is about me coming across that would make that trigger in you." It's just really intense present moment interactions.
Yeah, you're mirroring for each other in a really powerful and productive way, if done right. I remember in psychiatry residency, we had these process groups, or T groups, sometimes they'd be called. Every week for years, and in a stressful work environment, and as each year the cohort shifts a little bit as people come and go, but those were really powerful. And that reminds me, I was listening to an interview this week by Irvin Yalom, who and I saved the 1 minute quote of his summary of this kind of interpersonal process group, if you don't mind me reciting that, because he really pioneered this here and now work, in my opinion.
Yeah, let's hear it.
He said, "I'd never been in a group where the leader explicitly says, let's keep all this in the here and now." This is when he was like a resident young faculty. And that was a bit shocking. People started to say, well, we don't even know one another. How can we keep it in the here and now? But after 5 minutes, we began to know each other, and who was saying what, and who didn't want to do that, and who did want to do that. And soon I began to see it really was possible to keep the group in the here and now. We were interested in the group piece and the past history of people. We were interested in how we relate to one another in the immediate present. It's a rare time that you'll ever get feedback about how you come across to others in normal life, and yet our peer relationships are tremendously important to us. And for once, in group, we have a mirror that we can look into and see how others see us, and how we see them, and how accurately or inaccurately we see them. And I thought that was quite wonderful, and my mission then began to import that approach into group therapy.
I'd never read that quote, but it makes total sense. He was a huge source of education in my graduate school training around group therapy. I have a textbook like 4 inches thick about his group therapy stuff.
He's revised it 5-10 times.
Yeah. And was also one of my kind of the early inspirations to do here and now, present focused work with my clients, whether it was a group or individual.
Yeah,
so much power there.
He's been certainly one of my kind of unknown to me. I don't have a personal supervisory relationship, but one of my kind of faraway mentors.
Yeah.
And he's also a gifted writer. Has even written fiction.
Yeah.
But his book, and I can't remember what it is. It was kind of a part memoir, part I think it's on my shelf. Lessons for young therapists and psychiatrists late in his career. It was just so touching.
With The Gift of Therapy?
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
It's funny. I'll spill a little bit of tea here. Gary said that Irv, as he called him, was a much better teacher and writer and communicator than he was a therapist. That like in the
Interesting.
actual trenches, and I saw some videos of him doing therapy. They were fine. I don't know. Maybe Gary had a grudge, but
Yeah.
I'm sure Gary will never listen to this. So
That's funny.
Yeah. Yeah. Groups so powerful. And I think when I think about my personal experience with sort of my journey with psychedelics, my journey with my own therapy experiences, I feel like they're different, but I feel like, and important for different ways, that my group experiences have been the more impactful experiences, the more moving experiences, because a lot of what ails us, a lot of our traumas that occur in relationship. And so we might have talked about this in our attachment episode, but it makes sense that those things should be addressed in relationship as well.
Yeah.
And it might just be the dyad of a therapist and a client, but in a group format, it has the potential to be so much more powerful.
Yeah, we're interpersonal beings, wired to connect, and that's just another reason why it's striking that we don't do more group therapy. But I also realize we're in an age of extra concern around confidentiality and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of the process in group, is laying the ground rules for confidentiality in that setting. What's discussed in there stays in there, and also how people might react and relate if they run into people in the outside, and all those kind of things are part of holding good space for a good group.
Yeah, those ground rules need to be set early in that forming stage, so that people can feel free enough and safe enough to be raw and vulnerable in the ways they need to do, so that they can transform and do that hard work.
Yeah. So it's nice to see more group. I think psychedelics are bringing more group therapy research into the literature, into general mental health. We're paying more attention to it because of the traditional format of group ceremonial use of these medicines, for example. But still, most of the psychedelic studies, the modern ones, have been published in an individual way, with a few key empirical group studies that have come out.
Yeah. I look forward to more psychedelic group therapy research. I think we're going to find that, especially when we can get creative with the psychedelic medicines, LSD, MDMA groups. Or
funny you should mention that, because that's one paper I was looking at, trying to take an inventory of what papers have come out, because there was the MDMA group work done by Anderson and colleagues with people living with HIV. That was actually psilocybin. So I think UCSF, Anderson and colleagues, and our colleague and friend Paul Thielking did psilocybin groups up at the University of Utah. We've published several now here at Numinus, and one with Center for Change, some ketamine group therapy work, and more to come. But there was one from Gasser and colleagues in Switzerland that was MDMA and LSD. So MDMA was in the early stages of therapy. I don't know. They were given on different dosing days, but at least creatively sequenced.
They didn't do the old candy flip or whatever.
Yeah, it was a 2022 paper, Owen and Gasser. Yeah.
That's cool. I just sort of pulled that out of my...
Yeah, your creative idea is... others are having that same thought somewhere in Switzerland.
Well, I'm honored. I'm noticing that, you were kind of talking about how in our modern age, we are connected in ways that we never have been through the internet, through social media apps, but also more alone than we ever have been. And I'm seeing a renewed interest in things like men's groups, and they're often called men's groups or goddess groups, or groups around a particular shared quality or interest, veterans groups. And these are groups typically facilitated not by licensed mental health professionals, but just people with a passion for connection. And they'll go, and it won't just be sitting in a circle talking about your problems, which is the way a lot of psychotherapy groups are structured. It's, hey, let's go climb a mountain together. Let's go on an adventure together. Let's do something as a community. We'll get a breathwork facilitator to come in here and put Sananga in our eyes and have us do breathwork. Let's struggle together. And I've seen groups like this really help, really transform people who have felt isolated, they felt alone, they felt like they don't belong. And then as I want to do, I've also seen groups like this be unhelpful, especially when they turn into cults. let's just say it, right? When they are led by people who are charismatic and narcissistic and like to suck up all the power for themselves, especially when there are psychedelics involved, groups like this can get dangerous. We are, as human beings, susceptible to things like groupthink and cliques and alienating an out group and, dominating others, being part of this dominance hierarchy. So it's also, we're singing the praises of groups, but it's also important to be aware of some of the potential pitfalls with human organized groups.
Yeah, and one book idea for people who want to dive into that more that I have not read, but Hannah currently is reading.
Madness of Crowds?
No, Cultish.
Oh, yeah.
A book called Cultish, and she's been telling me about it. We've been talking a lot about what the word cultish means. It's more of talking about languages used by groups that is cult-like, but even like CrossFit. There are, if something's cultish, it's something to be aware of, but it doesn't mean it's inherently bad. Then you can kind of, if you're a social sciences researcher, hopefully a human with good radar on board, know if it's a harmful or a helpful thing to be part of this community. Like even Chick-fil-A, for example, if you work there, there's its own culture and everything. I won't even get into it, but one thing is that you can't say you're welcome. You have to say my pleasure or you're fired, apparently. Just things like that. Or Lululemon workers and enthusiasts. There's this whole other kind of cultish, cult-like lexicon and enthusiasm and shared view of the world. So I think it's super important to just be kind of keep eyes wide open in this, while also acknowledging that there is so much power in community, tribe, and connection.
Yeah. So those same things that make a community powerful and desirable to be a part of can be the same reasons that make a cult or an unhealthy group controlling and sticky and difficult to get out of. Yeah. So it's almost like, you've got the same tools, the same tool bag. It's the intent or the people behind the use of those tools that makes the difference.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, anything else about groups that you think might be useful for our audience to know?
Oh, there's so much, because it touches every part of life, right?
Yeah.
But I'll just leave with my favorite group quote by a guy by the name of Rodney Collin, and I don't know anything about him. It's one of the rare quotes where I don't know the author. I just really like the quote. But he said, our work is to realize conscious harmony, first in oneself individually, then in one's group, and so projected infinitely out into the world.
I love it. We'll let Rodney have the last word.
Amen.
Thanks, Reid. Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Numinus, a mental wellness company committed to tackling the global mental health crisis by delivering best-in-class psychedelic-assisted therapies, contributing to the body of primary and clinical psychedelic research, and fostering healing through community connection and social responsibility. You can learn more about Numinus at numinus.com. That's Numinus.com. If you enjoyed the show today and you want to support us, here's how you do it. Rate and review the show on platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Subscribe to the Numinus YouTube channel, like the videos, and share it. Share the show or clips of the show with someone that you think will enjoy it. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Consult with a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.